Addiction, more than a substance. Much of the research that for this speech has come from Dr. Broderick's Drugs and Human Behavior class, the material that I've been exposed to in the class, Dr. Raymond's book Unchain Your Brain, as well as some of my own personal struggles with addiction. How do people get hooked on a substance, whether it's illegal or illegal? If people are compared with the vervet monkeys on the island of St. Kitts, it is arguable that people are genetically predisposed to addiction. If heavy drinking runs in one's family history, it's possible that person could develop an addiction to alcohol. Take a look at the monkeys. Based on their history and based on their current actions, it's arguable that they have that predisposition. Aside from predisposition, there are various other factors, and the most important one is brain function. The way we treat our brains determines how our brains will treat us. Everything we consume, food, beverage, alcohol, legal or illegal drugs, cigarettes, and our daily activities, that all affects our brains and how our brains will, that affects our brains, and that in turn affects how we act. The prefrontal cortex is our commander-in-chief. When we're young, we don't have a strong PFC. Our brains will learn from experience if they're treated with care at a young age. Parents need to hear what I'm saying. What they do, their own behaviors, how they treat or do not treat their children, what they feed or do not feed their children, what they do or do not discuss with their children, it all affects the prefrontal cortex. According to Dr. Amen, adolescents typically have less efficient activity in the PFC because this part of the brain isn't fully developed until the age of 25. Until then, the brain is undergoing a process called myelinization, a process in which a protective substance called myelin wraps around the brain's neurons, helping the brain's nerve cells work up to 10 to 100 times more efficiently. So when drugs are used at a young age, it affects the development of the prefrontal cortex. A lot of children use drugs and alcohol at young ages to get away from struggles in the home. Now, I didn't come from a broken home, but I guess to be cool, I experimented a little bit. I always loved sugary foods, caffeine, and I started drinking coffee at the age of 13. I started drinking it heavily at the age of 19 when I was in college. While I was still in high school, I started experimenting with tobacco, marijuana, hallucinogens, and I continued to experiment with them between the ages of 17 and 24. While I sparingly used hallucinogens, I started drinking very heavily. Once I turned 21, drinking soon became an addiction because it was so easily accessible. I'd wake up thinking about drinking. I'd wake up thinking about giving up drinking. I had exhausted most of my funds. Most of it would go to the bar. Quite frequently, I was late with rent money. I had no savings account. I had a few near-death experiences between 2004 and 2010, one of which was a final wake-up call and luckily not a coffin. But in spite of all that, I continued to use. I had every reason to quit, and I continued to do it. In hindsight, if I ate healthier and exercised more as a child and preteen, my addictions would have never kicked into full gear. I'd often raid the refrigerator and the pantry for the sweetest snacks after school. I was young and my metabolism helped me stay somewhat thin, but my emotional brain ran my life. It got to the point when I became a young adult that I wouldn't even fight a craving, letting my limbic system and my basal ganglia completely take over. I had no supervisor. Now I do, because I exercise and eat healthier. My prefrontal cortex, it could definitely be stronger, but it is where it is, and it's a work in progress. When I drank heavily, I religiously followed Dr. Amen's 4 C's: craving, compulsion, loss of control, and continued use in spite of consequences. Why do people continue to use, and why do people relapse once they've stopped using a substance? It's never too late to get sober. It's tough for an addict to resist a relapse. I did it numerous times myself. Heroin addicts suffer a rough withdrawal. It makes them feel very sick, so they continue to use in spite of their consequences, even when they've exhausted everything. Meth addicts experience extreme depression once they've beaten withdrawal because meth gave them such a dopamine rush that it becomes so salient to the brain in terms of pleasure. One recovered meth addict studied in Dr. Broderick's class mentioned that it takes the brain 6 months to 1 year to generate dopamine on its own. So, to avoid that depression, to avoid that sickness, people will relapse, people will continue to use, and it is tough, or it is important that this is understood when people are trying to recover. Drugs play with the chemicals dopamine, serotonin, GABA, and endorphins. Chemicals in your brain that you do not want to mess with. If treated right, your brain will function healthy. With drugs and alcohol, it won't. Healthy eating, avoiding fast food, limiting foods that are high in fat and sugar, eating fruits, veggies, drinking green tea, limiting caffeine, exercising. All of that will boost dopamine levels. Exercise dramatically boosts dopamine. Also, exercise allows one tryptophan to get to the brain faster than other proteins, allowing healthy serotonin levels. Consuming foods that are high in glutamic acid, such as raw spinach, oats, green tea, lentils, taking magnesium supplements, vitamin B supplements, that allows healthy GABA function. Eating a small amount of chocolate, just a small amount of chocolate every day to bring your brain natural pleasure. According to Dr. Raymond, cocoa has been shown to increase endorphin production in the brain. So by doing these things, we can have a healthy brain. We can have addiction-free brains. We can even break addictions and break the cravings by following those steps. Engaging in brain-healthy activities such as exercise, learn a musical instrument, go back to school. Going back to school for something that one is passionate about, it'll increase the healthy brain activity, especially when the person applies what is learned. It's okay to get hooked on healthy brain activities. In doing so, it'll keep the brain distracted from a relapse. Cravings are easily stifled when one's PFC can calm the limbic system without a struggle. Heroin addicts cannot calm that limbic system. The methadone program keeps heroin addicts addicted because it offers one solution, stability. It doesn't consider the person's psychological addiction, it just keeps the person stable. If an addict makes it through withdrawal cold turkey, he has to deal with the cravings and the depression, so he goes to the methadone clinic. But in an inpatient rehabilitation center, he should be forced to stimulate healthy brain function with proper diet and exercise. Rehabilitation needs to be a process where a person learns his or her brain and how to take control of it, not a place where one addiction is replaced with the next. So be proactive. Parents, please consider your behaviors and how your behaviors affect your children. Make sure to have that conversation about drugs and alcohol, including inhalants, before they reach the experimental stage that you probably reached at one point in life and that most adolescents reach. Rather than drugs or alcohol, a teenager may get hooked on playing sports, academics, making music, dating, all which are activities that promote healthy brain function, just so long as there's no serious head injury sustained. So give them the tools to have a healthy brain, so that by the time the myelin is fully developed, they can have a strong prefrontal cortex.